What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the multi-team elimination mode is here in Black Ops Cold War, and I just finally got a chance to check it out. I've been out for most of the weekend, so I wasn't able to give this a shot early on, but I've finally been able to jump in and get enough playtime in it for me to share my initial impressions of this mode. Now, for those that don't know, this mode it kind of feels like a Blackout 2.0, or at least a miniature version of Blackout 2.0. That's how I like to describe it, because it's got a lot of Treyarch-like mechanics. The maps are much more like the Blackout map than the Warzone map. And after getting a decent amount of playtime with this, I've got pretty mixed feelings overall. And let's start it off with the stuff that I really like about this mode so far. The first thing is the map style, the map design. I really like this. It's a refreshing change of pace compared to Warzone. I feel like most of the engagements, at least outside of the initial drop-in, most of the engagements are more out in open terrain rather than inside buildings. And like I said, I just think this is refreshing after playing Warzone as my primary Battle Royale experience for the past year. It's kind of nice to see a little bit of a better mix and using trees and rocks and stuff for cover instead of basically just going from building to building and point of interest to point of interest. Going off of that, I also really enjoy the fast pace of this mode. Each game lasts for a maximum of about like 12 minutes or so. It's like 10 to 12 minutes for an entire game. And that just makes for a much more casual experience where the stakes aren't quite as high. If you end up getting taken out toward the end of a game or something, it's not quite as frustrating as in Warzone because you quite simply haven't invested as much time into that match. And you can just queue up and hop into another quick game. Now, I know for really hardcore Battle Royale players, that might not be what they're looking for. A lot of people love the high stakes of that, and that's what makes it enjoyable to them. And to some extent, I agree, but in my mind, that's what Warzone's for. If you want that more serious Battle Royale experience, of course, you go play Warzone, whereas this is more of just like a quick, casual, fun sort of a BR-style mode. That's something I really enjoy, but going off of that fast pace, what this means is there's really no time to camp, I've found. There's very little time to like set up in a building or set up in a corner or something and just wait for enemies to come. It seems like most of the time, after the first minute or two of the game where everybody's just sort of settling in, finding their loot, getting their initial fights over with, once that's over, you're basically on the move, or at least you've got to be very aware of that radiation and you've got to be thinking about moving. And so far in my experience, I just haven't run into anybody that's just like sitting in the corner of a room or something waiting for you. It seems like, for the most part, people are on the move, which again just improves the pacing of the game overall. It's also really refreshing to not have loadouts in this mode. This means when you hop into a game, you never really know what you're going to get. You never know which gun you're going to end up with, and I find that to be enjoyable, but at the same time, it does introduce a lot more randomness than something like Warzone where you do have loadouts, because sometimes you simply won't get a very good gun, and your opponent will get a great gun. So there are definitely some pros and cons to this, but it's more so just a different style, and again, this is something that I find refreshing after playing a lot of Warzone. And one last thing I want to mention on the pro side of things, the things I really like, is the armor mechanics. And I've been saying this from the beginning with Fireteam Dirty Bomb as well. I love the fact that when you put an armor plate in, you get effectively 50 health added on. And it doesn't just fill up to the nearest bar of armor. You actually get that 50 armor until your armor is completely full. And I know that seems minor, but this is just something I've been basically begging for in Warzone for so long, and we still don't have it. And I just like the consistency that this adds. So yeah, that's the list that I put together so far, the things that I am really enjoying so far with this multi-team elimination mode. Now let's get into the stuff I don't really like or I feel like could use some work. And keep in mind, of course, this section is going to be much longer, not necessarily because I think there is more bad than good in this mode. It's just that it often takes longer to explain why I don't like something compared to why I do like something. And I also want to be taking the time to share my feedback properly and also maybe share a few ideas I have for improving in certain areas. So hopping right into it, the first thing that I noticed with this mode that really put me off the first couple games that I played is it seems like the loot distribution is just horribly inconsistent. There were some times where I would drop into a cluster of buildings, keeping in mind there's not too many clusters of buildings on these maps, or at least most of the maps. There aren't too many clusters of buildings, and yet I would go through like 3 buildings and not find a single piece of loot. No chests at all in 3 buildings, and there are barely any buildings on these maps. What this means is for a couple of the matches I played, I was running around with the base MP5 for quite a long time in the match, and I was at a significant disadvantage to anybody that found basically any other gun in a crate. And that's all because I simply couldn't find a crate. And like I said earlier, I do like the fact that there aren't loadouts, but when you don't have loadouts, I feel like there should at least be a more even spread and even distribution of loot so that everybody sort of has a chance at least to get some loot. With the way these maps are laid out and with how few buildings there are on the map, there should be a guarantee of at least 1 crate per building. Like bare minimum 1 crate per building. Another thing that goes along with this is there is no ground loot as far as I can tell. And what I mean by this is loot that doesn't come out of a crate. So there aren't just guns laying around in buildings or anything like that randomly. You have to find the loot crates, open them, and then that's where you get your loot from. Now, I strongly feel this is due to engine limitations, because that's another con with this. I found that I was often dropping frames, there were some stutters, some skips. I don't know if this is due to the servers, or if this is just due to the engine limitations. But overall, the performance of the game wasn't too great. And like I said, this is likely why they don't have guns just laying around all over the map. But I do think it would be a superior way of handling it if you did have that standard loot that was just sort of floating around on the floor. Now, when I talk about this inconsistent loot distribution, you're probably wondering what I'm talking about because the background gameplay is showing plenty of loot, but that's what I mean by it being inconsistent. In this particular match that I played, I was getting loot crates all over the place. I could be picky with which gun I wanted. But it felt like this was like 1 in 4 games where I was getting the choice of my loot, and I actually ran into a ton of these loot boxes. Now, moving on, let's talk about a few little gameplay mechanics that I'm not too fond of in this mode. The first one is reviving teammates. You have to look directly at the teammate. You can't like keep your head on a swivel and look out for enemies, unlike in Warzone. That's something I really like about Warzone. Also, the next thing is when enemies redeploy and they're opening a chute near you, it's very quiet. It's not a super distinct sound. It's not easy to pinpoint exactly where that parachute is opening. And I think that should be louder because I have run into a few situations where someone basically just lands in directly behind me with their parachute. And I either didn't hear it at all or I heard it, but I thought like, oh, that's super far away. That's not something I need to worry about. But it turned out they were basically right behind me. So I do feel like that parachute audio could be boosted a little bit more just to make it slightly easier to pinpoint somebody landing right on top of you in order to discourage people from doing that. Then another thing that I was really missing in this mode is the lack of the ability to ping enemy players. Now you can ping locations, and if you double tap the ping button, which is left on the D-pad for controller, I'm not too sure what it is for PC, you can drop a ping that says danger. So you can kind of use that as a workaround where you can be just double tapping toward enemy players, and that will show your teammates at least that there is danger in that vicinity, but you can't ping players directly. Now, as I'm saying this, perhaps this is a pro as well. Like, this is maybe something that's just down to personal preference. I know a lot of people don't like the fact that you can be live pinged in Warzone, especially by players that you've already downed, so then they can show your exact location to their teammates. But yeah, there is a big part of me that wishes that you could directly ping enemy players with a single tap. And then another mechanic that I have kind of mixed thoughts on. I don't necessarily think it's all bad, but I don't know, maybe it could use just a little bit of tweaking. This is the radiation zones themselves. And with this, there's a few things I don't like a whole lot. The first thing is there isn't a clearly defined line where you're going to start taking damage from that radiation. It seems like you can be a little bit in toward the edge of the radiation and not take any damage, but I'm having a hard time distinguishing between like that exact line with where I'm going to be taking damage and where I'm not going to be taking damage from that radiation. And I wish that would be a bit more clearly defined. Additionally, something I noticed is looking into the radiation is so much more clear than looking out from inside the radiation. And to some extent, I understand that. Like, if you are in the radiation, that's where you're not supposed to be, and you shouldn't have an advantage against people that aren't in the radiation and are playing the game properly. But I just feel like the discrepancy is way too high. I can look pretty clearly into the radiation, whereas looking out, I can see almost nothing. And I mean, if you're trapped in the radiation, you're already at a pretty big disadvantage most of the time. So it would be kind of nice if they made an adjustment here so you could either see a little bit more clearly looking out of the radiation, or make it so you can't see quite as well looking into the radiation from the outside. Next up, another mechanic that I noticed that could be easily tweaked, and I wouldn't mind seeing a tweak to, this is fall damage. I feel like they should definitely be increasing the height at which you can fall without taking damage, just like they did with Modern Warfare multiplayer compared to Warzone. I think they more than doubled the height that you could fall from before taking damage, and it just makes sense if you're playing in larger scale modes where you're often landing on top of buildings and stuff. But yeah, that's a fairly minor thing, but it's also something that could be very easily tweaked, I'm sure. And with that, there's just one last thing I wanted to mention in this video that I've had a pretty big problem with so far, and this is the latency in this mode and just the general connection experience. Like I said earlier, there was a lot of like hitching and frame drops, and it felt like a lot of skipping and stuff, and situations where my bullets just felt like they were going right through enemy players. And I noticed that in a lot of my games, my ping was like 180 milliseconds. It was unacceptably high. but in other games it wasn't nearly as bad. And really all I'm asking for here is if the player population isn't super high, which I suspect is the case because this isn't a free-to-play thing, and it also wasn't really widely marketed, I don't feel. So I don't think the player population is super high in this mode, but I really wish the matchmaking would take a little bit longer if that meant I was going to get a playable ping. Because 180 milliseconds in this mode, it's practically unplayable. I don't want to play that at all. And I've actually gotten to the point now where I just check my ping at the beginning of the match, and if it's 180 milliseconds or something around that, I just leave. And I feel kind of bad because I play solo, so I'm playing with randoms, but I might as well because I'm just going to be useless in that game, and I'm not going to have any enjoyment whatsoever. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Overall, I think it's really nice and refreshing to have this mode. I love the super fast-paced, low-investment style of Battle Royale where you can just sort of hop in, quick, casual modes. It's a nice change of pace coming from Warzone. But, I mean, it's not like it really directly competes with Warzone. This is a totally different style of experience that's designed to be much more casual. And in that sense, I really enjoy it. I just wish they could make some improvements in some areas, like loot distribution, as well as just general performance. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's going to wrap it up for my initial impressions of this mode. I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think of this multi-team elimination mode so far in Cold War? Are you generally enjoying it, or do you not like it at all? Just let me know those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.